Hello, and welcome to today's Sara Alert training about managing line lists. I'm Alex from the Sara Alert team, and I'm going to be walking you through step by step how to manage cases and case contacts who we call monitorees in Sara Alert. So let's get started. Here's an overview of what we will be discussing in this training. We'll be talking about the different workflows in Sara Alert for cases versus case contacts. Then we'll go over how, with each workflow, Sara Alert organizes monitorees into different line lists depending on their symptom status. I'll touch on where a monitoree will appear in a few common scenarios, and then we'll walk you through some of those scenarios in our demo system. And finally, I'll show you a few tricks for monitoree management, including how to edit multiple monitorees at the same time and how to assign monitorees to a specific user or group of users. This training is relevant for public health and public health enroller users. Both have the ability to see and edit monitoree records and symptom reports. Sara Alert has two parallel workflows for monitoring individuals depending on their case status. Case contacts are measured in the exposure workflow, 14 days after their last date of exposure, to see if they develop symptoms and determine if they become ill. Confirmed cases are monitored in the isolation workflow to determine when it is safe to discontinue isolation. So if I pull up Sara Alert, our demo system, you'll see we can easily flip through the two different workflows by clicking here in the top right. So in our demo environment, you'll see that we have 399 individuals we're monitoring in quarantine in our exposure monitoring workflow. So these are case contacts. And we have 176 confirmed cases that we're monitoring in isolation in our isolation monitoring workflow. So within each of the Sara Alert workflows, monitorees are automatically sorted into line lists depending on their symptom status and a few other factors. And part of the power of Sara Alert is the ability to quickly identify individuals that have been flagged for follow-up. So you can spend resources following up with those monitorees who are experiencing symptoms rather than those who are not. I'll go through each of these line lists in detail in a moment, but for now, the big takeaway on this slide is that the red and yellow line lists, so symptomatic in the exposure workflow, non-reporting, or records requiring review in the isolation workflow and non-reporting, these are the folks that you'll want to be following up with, whether it's to determine their case status or their symptom status. So I pull up Sara Alert again in our demo system. I'll actually walk through the individual line lists and what they mean. So we'll start in the exposure workflow. Again, these are case contacts, and there are 399 total case contacts that we're monitoring, quarantine. And if you click on the All Monitorees tab here, you can look at all 399 of these folks. You can flip through their pages here at the bottom. You can show more monitorees on a page here if you want to look at 100 instead of 25 like we were looking at before. And you can search for monitorees based on their name, their jurisdiction, or their assigned user. And I'll get into that later in the demonstration. So we can look at all 399 monitorees here on this All Monitorees tab. And those 399 case contacts are split up into other line lists depending on their symptom status and a couple other factors. So I'll start here with the asymptomatic line list. These are monitorees who are currently reporting no symptoms. They've reported on their symptom report in the last day. So these are folks that have filled in their daily symptom report, and we know that they are not currently experiencing any symptoms. For folks that do report that they're experiencing symptoms, they'll show up on the symptomatic line list, which is flagged in red to show that there's some follow-up you need to do, right? Because these are folks who are reporting symptoms, and we'll want to reach out to them to determine if we want to recommend a test or just kind of keep track of their current status. Maybe they'll develop into a case. For folks that fail to report on their daily symptom report within 24 hours, they'll show up here on this non-reporting line list. And so these are folks that they're not experiencing symptoms, but we also don't have a recent symptom report from them. And so we might want to follow up with them to ascertain their current symptom status. It's possible that since they filled out their last report, they did in fact, develop some symptoms. For folks who do report symptoms and we decide we want to do some follow-up with them, we can mark them as a person under investigation, and they'll move to the persons under investigation or PUI line list. These are folks that we've flagged for further follow-up. So typically individuals who reported symptoms, and perhaps we recommended a test, a COVID test for them, and we're waiting on the results of that test. We can mark them as a person under investigation, and they'll get moved to this line list. And different jurisdictions are using this line list differently, so it's important that you work with your colleagues to determine how your health department is actually using this list. Once someone has ended their monitoring period, if they didn't develop symptoms after 14 days from their last date of exposure, they'll automatically get moved to the closed line list, and eventually their information will get removed from Sara Alert. You can also manually close out a record at any time, and I'll show you how that works a little later on. And then for folks that are transferred into your jurisdiction from another jurisdiction using Sara Alert, or perhaps from a different county in your state, if you're working at the county level, they'll show up here on this transferred in line list. And they'll show up here for 24 hours, and they'll also, depending on their symptom status, show up on the appropriate other line list here. So they'll actually show up twice. They'll show up once in the transferred in line list, and for example, if they are reporting symptoms on their last symptom report, they'll show up here on the symptomatic line list. That doesn't mean that there are two records in Sara Alert. It's the same record. It can just be seen in two different line lists. And if you transfer someone out of your jurisdiction, they'll show up here on this transferred out line list. So perhaps they've moved to a different jurisdiction and you've transferred their record over. After you make that transfer, the individual will get moved to this line list and you'll no longer have access to their record. And for more information about transferring folks in and out, you can see a Sara Alert training that we did actually about those two features. So in the isolation monitoring workflow, and remember these are for now confirmed cases, we have a slightly different set of line lists for a somewhat different workflow. Since instead of monitoring individuals for a set period from their date of exposure, we're actually monitoring confirmed cases for an indeterminate period, right? Because we don't know when their symptoms will improve, and we don't know when we'll be able to remove them from isolation. That's kind of why we're using Sara Alert, is to get that information from them to help us make that determination. So similarly to the exposure workflow, there's a tab here for all cases. If you want to just easily see all the cases you're monitoring in your jurisdiction, you can click on that tab, and then you can search through this list to find someone. It could be the easiest, rather than if you know the name of someone you want to find, rather than trying to figure out which line list they're on, you can click on this all cases line list and search for them there. If someone is reporting, this is a confirmed case, and they're reporting, on their daily symptom report in the last day, maybe they're reporting symptoms, maybe not, but they haven't yet met one of Sara Alert's internal recovery definitions, they'll show up here on this reporting line list, right? And so we would expect, a confirmed case to have symptoms of COVID, and until they meet one of our recovery definitions, they'll be on this reporting line list, provided they fill out their daily symptom report. And similarly to the exposure workflow, if they don't fill out their symptom report, and so we're missing a day, a day of symptom reporting from them, a day or more, right? They'll show up here on this non-reporting list. But once the monitoree has met one of our preliminary recovery definitions, so just to give you an example of what that might mean, one of our internal definitions, right, is 10 days from the onset of symptoms, and then 3 days without reporting a fever and without reporting the use of fever-reducing medication. If a monitoree meets, those qualifications, they'll automatically get moved to this records requiring review list. And that's automatic. That's not something that you have to do as a user. Once they meet one of our test definitions for recovery, they'll show up on this line list. And then you'll want to actually go into the record and either extend their monitoring or close them out of Sara Alert. And similarly to the other workflow, right, we have a line list for closed monitorees. Same idea, right? These are folks we're not currently following up with, and eventually their information will get removed from the system. And we have the same transferred in and transferred out line lists. Now these are for cases rather than case contacts. And so this slide shows the same line lists that I just went over, the same that were listed on the previous slide, but instead they are organized on the left by line lists that are the same in both workflows, and on the right, those that are different across the workflows. So the four on the left, the non-reporting, closed, transferred in, transferred out, these are the same. It's the same basic idea, whether you're following cases or case contacts. But on the right, these are the line lists that are actually different between both workflows. And I'm not going to go through this in detail since it's really the same information that I just shared, but this is really for you if you find it useful to see the line lists, in this way in terms of what is the same for cases and case contacts versus what's different. It's just a different way to organize that information. So let's get into some key scenarios that you might see with your monitorees. So the way that we frame this slide is, right, it's where will a monitoree appear if they meet, one of these definitions here on these bullets, right? So for monitorees that you've just entered into the system, either via manual enrollment, you enrolled them through the enrollment wizard, or you imported them, did a bulk import. If you've just added them to the system, they'll show up on the green line list for 24 hours, regardless of which workflow they're in. So if it's a case contact and you just enrolled them, they'll show up on the asymptomatic line list. And if it's a case and you just enrolled them, they'll show up on the reporting line list. Both, are colored green to show that there's no follow-up needed for that monitoree. And so it makes sense, right? If you, just added someone to the system, if they're a case contact, the system doesn't really have any symptom, information for that individual. And so it assumes that they're, either asymptomatic or they haven't yet met one of the recovery definitions. It's just kind of, where they're kept for 24 hours until we receive a report for the monitoree. Once that happens, they'll move to either the red or the green line list, depending on their response. So if they report symptoms, if they're a case contact, they fill out their symptom report and report symptoms, they'll get moved to the symptomatic line list. That makes sense, right? If we don't receive a report within 24 hours, the monitoree, regardless of the workflow, they'll get moved to the yellow non-reporting line list, right? And so that shows that they didn't fill out their most recent symptom report. We're not sure of their most current symptom status. We might need to do some follow-up with those folks. And of course, if someone's transferred into your jurisdiction, they'll show up on the transferred in line list. If they're transferred out of your jurisdiction, they'll show up on the transferred out list. Pretty straightforward. Now, for someone who completes 14 days of monitoring, so we're talking about in the exposure workflow, if, after 14 days from their last date of exposure, they remain well, so that means they would finish their monitoring period on the asymptomatic line list, right? Because they didn't report symptoms, at least on that last day of monitoring. Then they'll automatically be moved to the closed line list with completed monitoring as the reason for that closure. However, if they reach the end of their monitoring period and they are symptomatic or non-reporting, they'll actually stay on those line lists indefinitely until they move to the symptomatic line list. So it starts to the asymptomatic line list and then are automatically closed out. So, what I mean by that is, right, if it's someone is on the 14th day of monitoring, their most recent symptom report shows that they did report symptoms, they'll actually stay. They won't get closed out of the system automatically. They'll stay on the symptomatic line list until a user goes in and actually, reviews their symptoms and either, marks their symptom report as reviewed, which would move them back to the asymptomatic line list, and then they would be closed out of the system that way automatically. In the isolation workflow, monitorees who meet any of the Sara Alert internal recovery definitions, and so the example I gave before, right, was 10 days since symptom onset and 3 days without fever or fever-reducing medication, they'll automatically move to the records requiring review line list until their situation is reviewed by a public health user, and they're either manually closed out to signify that they completed monitoring or have their monitoring extended by the user. And so to illustrate this, I'm actually going to walk you through the life of a monitoree in the system. So right before I recorded this, I added a monitoree to the system as a case contact. So we're in the exposure monitoring workflow. And since I just added them to the system, Bugs Bunny here, they're going to show up on the asymptomatic line list. And if we open the record, we can see why that's the case, because we don't have any symptom reports for this monitoree. And since we don't have any symptom reports, the system, assumes that they're asymptomatic until we hear otherwise. So if I, either as a user or as the monitoree, I'll just kind of show you as the user, if I were to add a symptom report for the monitoree manually and click submit, check off several symptoms that the monitoree would be experiencing. The monitoree will have a symptom report that's flagged in red, and the monitoree will get moved to this symptomatic line list, okay? And so if we go back now into the exposure dashboard here, you'll see the monitoree is no longer on the asymptomatic line list. And if we were to go here, symptomatic, search for the monitoree, they'll pop up right here. We can go back into the record and we'll see the symptom report still here. If we follow up with the monitoree now, and because we knew that they, this is someone we want to follow up with since they were flagged on the symptomatic line list, if we follow up with them and determine, for whatever reason, we don't suspect that these symptoms represent a likely case of COVID, we can click the Mark All Reviewed button to review all symptomatic reports, or go into the Actions section here and click Review, which will review this symptom report, and we can give a reason, for example, not likely case of COVID, something like that. Click Submit. The monitoree will, their status will change to asymptomatic, and they'll move back to the asymptomatic line list, showing that there's no follow-up needed. And then we'll wait for the next, monitoree symptom report in the next 24 hours. Hopefully they will submit another report and we'll be able to take it from there. If they fail to submit a symptom report in 24 hours, of course, they'll show up here on the non-reporting line list. Okay. Alternatively, if we were to follow up with the monitoree and determine, well, they did report difficulty breathing, fever, chills. I mean, this seems like someone we'd want to, keep in touch with, right? We want to maybe recommend them for a COVID test, or for whatever reason, mark them as a person under investigation. So the way we do that is we'd scroll up here to the monitoring actions section, click on latest public health action, and we can choose, what the action is, maybe recommend medical evaluation. I'll do recommended laboratory testing. And this will move the monitoree to the persons under investigation line list. So if I were to click submit, you'll see the current status of the monitoree has changed again to PUI, persons under investigation. If I were to scroll up now, return to the dashboard, go to the PUI line list, we'll see the monitoree is right here now. And this shows that this is someone we've followed up with, and we're maybe waiting on, the results of some kind of follow-up medical evaluation, lab test, something like that. So if the monitoree, we follow up with them, we get the, information from them, they're a positive lab test or something like that. If we determine that, unfortunately, they did become a case of COVID, the way we would, continue to monitor them in Sara Alert, change their case status, is to scroll up here, back to monitoring actions, go to case status, and click confirmed. Then we'll have two options. We can, if you're not using Sara Alert to monitor confirmed cases, I suspect most folks watching this video will be, but if you're not, if your jurisdiction isn't, you can click End Monitoring, and this will close out the individual's record, and you can continue to follow up with them using a different system. But if you are using Sara Alert, as I suspect most folks are, you can continue monitoring the individual in the isolation workflow. You'll click that button here, and you'll get a note saying that the Monitory will get moved to the isolation workflow. Click Submit, and you'll see the Monitory status has changed again, right? So now the Monitory is in the isolation workflow, and their current status is reporting. And this means that we have received a symptom report from them in the past day, and whether or not it was symptomatic, like we said, they're a confirmed case, so we would expect maybe that they're reporting symptoms. What we're really waiting on is for them to meet one of our preliminary recovery definitions. And if that's the case, and see now we're looking at confirmed cases, before we're looking at exposed monitories, now we're looking at confirmed cases in isolation. And when it is the case that the Monitory meets one of the recovery definitions, they'll move to this records requiring review tab here. And what we'll do is we'll click on the record, and I'll just kind of click one here in our demo system. We'll click on the record, and we'll want to follow up with the Monitory to determine if it's safe for them to discontinue isolation. If it is safe, we would go to the monitoring status under monitoring actions, click not monitoring, and we'd select the reason meets criteria to discontinue isolation. If we click submit, you'll see the Monitory is no longer being actively monitored, which means that they'll appear here on the closed line list. See right at the top. And eventually their information will be removed from Sara Alert. Okay. So that was just a basic overview of kind of the basic actions you need to take as a public health user, public health enroller, to move someone through Sara Alert from start of quarantine and then potentially into and then out of isolation. We have a larger list of specific scenarios highlighted in our quick start guides and step-by-step instructions in our user guide, both of which are available on the Sara Alert website, which is saraalert.org, and I'll have a link to that at the end of this presentation. So just some screenshots here from our quick start guides for exposure monitoring and for isolation monitoring. So I want to close out with a few tips that might help make your life as a Sara Alert user all that much easier, right? So the first is how to bulk edit monitories. So currently in Sara Alert, you can bulk close or update the case status for multiple records with just a few clicks. So you would first select the monitorees by clicking the little checkbox next to their record. You can click as many of those as you want, or you can click the top button here to select all. I'll show you in the system in a minute. And then you would click the actions button and then choose the appropriate action. So whether you want to close the records or update the case status. So let me kind of show you here what that looks like. So if we had a couple records that we wanted to maybe close out all at once, could select them individually like this. We can select all the records in the current view by clicking this checkbox or deselect them all in that way also. Select a couple, click actions, and then we could either click close records or update case status. I'll just pick close just for demonstration. You'd want to, just as you would when you're closing out a record, select the reason. Perhaps we know that these three individuals, we want to end their isolation, click submit, and those folks will get moved to the closed line list. And we also support the ability to assign monitorees to a specific user or group. Now, this is different from assigning the jurisdiction for the monitorees. It doesn't affect record access. This is just for within your jurisdiction, within your health department, for your users. It's just a way to organize the monitorees, right? And you can assign monitorees to a specific user, and that flags for that user. These are the folks that I'm responsible for following up with. So the assigned user field, you can specify that either on enrollment, like in this screenshot here, it's on the final page of enrollment, or during import. It's one of the fields in import. The field takes a value from 0 to, I think, 9,999. So that should cover all of the users you might possibly have in your health department. And it's used to identify a user, a group of users within a jurisdiction that's responsible for, a specific set of monitories. So for example, if I know that I am user, I guess here in this example, 998 in the screenshot, then, for all of the monitories in the system, for where the assigned user is 998, and it's very easy to sort, based on that field, I would know that these are the folks that I'm responsible for following up with. And so, depending on their symptom status, I'll know that I need to follow up with them. So like I said, this is something each jurisdiction is determining on their own. It doesn't affect record access. And so you should work with your colleagues in the health department to determine how you want to use this field. And so I'll just quickly jump back into the system here and show you kind of what I mean. So you can see if I were, for example, user number 8072, I could type in 8072 in this assigned user field, and it would flag just the users, just the monitorees that I am responsible for. So just kind of a way to help you manage the folks in your system. I know a lot of jurisdictions have a lot of monitorees they're trying to keep track of. All right, so that actually concludes this session of Sara Alert training. For more information or to access user guides or quick start guides, please visit saraalert.org. And I'll see you next time.